The United States spent over $2.5 billion planning a critical bridge rebuild, and still had to turn to China for help. What made the world's most powerful nation outsource its own infrastructure to a foreign rival? And how did China turn the tables on US engineering giants? Let's break down the shocking reasons behind this global embarrassment. Long before the cranes moved in or traffic was rerouted, the Alexander Hamilton Bridge rebuild was already in trouble, and it hadn't even started. The US government had committed over $2.6 billion to overhaul this critical artery connecting Manhattan to the Bronx. It was one of the busiest pieces of infrastructure in New York City, carrying more than 300,000 vehicles every single day. But decades of wear and increasing structural strain had pushed it to the edge. A full-scale reconstruction was unavoidable. What wasn't expected was how quickly American firms would tap out. From the start, federal and state officials made it clear. They wanted this job to go to American companies. Rebuilding a New York icon with foreign labor, especially from a geopolitical rival, was unthinkable. Bidding opened up to top domestic engineering and construction firms, many of which had worked on US megaprojects in the past. But what came back shocked everyone. Some firms declined to bid outright. Others submitted plans with cost projections so inflated they triggered internal red flags. Several included multi-year timelines with unclear milestones. And nearly all proposed traffic restrictions that would bring the city's core to a standstill. In simpler terms, they couldn't handle it. This wasn't just a construction job. It was a logistical nightmare. New York demanded that traffic remain uninterrupted throughout the entire rebuild. That meant the bridge couldn't be closed, not even temporarily, despite its crumbling condition. And that requirement alone caused many American contractors to walk away or inflate their pricing. This wasn't the first time the US had faced this problem. The Oakland Bay Bridge disaster in California was still fresh in memory. A rebuild that was supposed to cost under $1 billion ended up ballooning to over $6 billion after years of mismanagement. The turning point in that case? US firms were replaced by Chinese contractors who finished the job. New York officials saw the writing on the wall. They could either risk another slow-motion failure or open the doors to global competition. And when they did, China didn't just show up, they dominated. When China's bid to rebuild the Alexander Hamilton Bridge landed on the table, it wasn't just competitive, it was a real eye-opener. At the center of the proposal was the China State Construction Engineering Corporation, or CSCC, the largest construction company in the world. This wasn't their first rodeo. In fact, Chinese firms like CSCC had already transformed skylines, connected continents, and tackled some of the most extreme engineering challenges in human history. While US firms struggled with labor shortages, regulatory delays, and rising material costs, China had been quietly mastering the game. Over the past 2 decades, the Chinese government had invested trillions in infrastructure, building high-speed rail networks, mega-airports, cross-sea bridges, and entire smart cities. Their construction giants weren't just experienced. They were hyper-optimized machines designed for speed, scale, and precision. By 2013, China was home to more than 60 of the world's top 100 construction firms, with CSCC regularly ranked number 1 by revenue. These weren't just domestic champions. They were global operators completing megaprojects in Africa, Latin America, Europe, and increasingly in the United States. And that's what made their entry into New York so significant. With the Alexander Hamilton Bridge in line, it was the first time a Chinese company was trusted with a US infrastructure project of this magnitude. It signaled a shift, not just in engineering capability, but in global perception. China was no longer the country of knockoff products or cheap manufacturing. It was now the country you called when you needed something done right, fast, and under budget. CSCC's proposal didn't just promise efficiency, it delivered something American firms hadn't. A plan to keep the bridge open during construction, an accelerated timeline, and a guaranteed price point that slashed costs by more than half. It wasn't just a better deal. It was a hard slap to American engineering pride. This was the moment that stunned critics into silence. When the Alexander Hamilton Bridge rebuild was first proposed, the budget ballooned to a staggering $2.6 billion. A figure that made headlines and raised eyebrows across the country. But here's what most people didn't know. The final cost came in at just $400 million. And the reason? China. The answer lies in China's scale, systems, and strategy. Companies like CSCC have built entire megacities in less time than it takes American contractors to complete a major highway renovation. Their centralized structure allows them to control design, manufacturing, logistics, and labor from end to end. Materials are sourced in bulk at lower cost. Workers are highly specialized, and timelines are ruthlessly efficient. More importantly, they came prepared. CSCC didn't walk into the project with vague ideas or a let's-figure-it-out-later approach. They showed up with pre-modeled 3D plans, precise engineering sequences, and custom-designed solutions tailored to the bridge's structural weaknesses. They used modular components that were fabricated off-site and installed with near-military precision. And they did it in the middle of New York, one of the most logistically challenging cities in the world, while keeping traffic moving. This was about building cheaper and smarter, with a plan figured out already. CSCC proved that the real cost of American infrastructure isn't just in steel and concrete. It's in inefficiency, fragmentation, and outdated systems. Systems that China, quite simply, has already outgrown. And in the end, this project sent a clear message. If you want American taxpayers to get real value, it might not come from American firms. The moment the U.S. officially awarded the bridge contract to China State Construction Engineering Corporation, it wasn't just engineers who reacted. It was the entire country. Public backlash was swift, loud, and emotional. News outlets ran headlines like, "America can't even build its own bridges anymore." Critics blasted the decision as unpatriotic, claiming it was a betrayal of American workers and a surrender of sovereignty. Online forums exploded with outrage. Protesters gathered near City Hall in New York. And on Capitol Hill, lawmakers grilled transportation officials about how and why a Chinese firm was allowed to take control of a major U.S. infrastructure project. For many, it was about national pride, the idea that the most powerful country in the world, a country that once built the Hoover Dam, the Golden Gate Bridge, and the interstate highway system, had to import engineering talent to fix its own infrastructure, felt like a slap in the face. Union leaders argued that American jobs were being handed to foreign competitors. National security analysts warned of potential vulnerabilities. Some even suggested that Chinese-built components could pose surveillance risks, though no such evidence ever surfaced in this case. The backlash reached a fever pitch when commentators pointed out that this wasn't a one-off. The U.S. had already leaned on China during the Oakland Bay Bridge reconstruction years earlier, a project that was also plagued by delays until a Chinese firm stepped in. It was becoming a pattern, and that pattern sparked fears. Are we becoming dependent on China to keep our roads and bridges standing? But here's what many critics ignored. Still, the outrage revealed something deeper. A quiet panic. The kind that comes when a country starts to realize it may no longer be the best at what it once dominated. And as critics fumed, the Chinese team quietly got to work, under budget, ahead of schedule, and with the eyes of an entire nation watching. If there was ever any doubt about why China got the job, it vanished the moment construction began. The Alexander Hamilton Bridge rebuild wasn't just about replacing worn-out steel and concrete. It was a test of ingenuity under pressure, one that most firms wouldn't dare take on. And for the biggest challenge of which the bridge couldn't close. Not for a day, not for an hour, and traffic had to keep flowing across one of the most critical routes in New York City, while it was being completely rebuilt. CSCC didn't even blink. That alone would have made most contractors walk away. CSCC approached the project not as a problem, but as a systems puzzle. Their first step was to conduct extensive 3D structural modeling of the bridge, not just to identify where it was weakest, but to simulate traffic flow, stress tolerances, and real-time load shifts during construction. They created a breathing digital twin of the entire bridge. With that data, they developed a bold, unconventional plan. Widen the bridge deck first. By expanding the structure on both sides, they created new lanes that could carry full traffic volume. Before even touching the old bridge core, once traffic was safely shifted to the temporary lanes, they began the real work, dismantling and rebuilding the original deck, supports, and substructure underneath. This process, known as staged deck expansion. Meanwhile, U.S. engineers watched from the sidelines, some with admiration, others with disbelief. Traditional American approaches would have called for phased closures or partial shutdowns, stretching the project over years and snarling traffic for millions. What CSCC achieved in just a fraction of that time proved a painful truth. Chinese engineering was ahead and undoubtedly competitive. And perhaps most impressive of all, there were no major delays, no structural incidents, no overruns, just a steady, methodical march toward completion. Innovation had officially crossed the Pacific and landed in New York with boots on the ground. As if engineering a bridge rebuild without disrupting 300,000 daily vehicles wasn't enough, the Chinese team soon faced a new crisis. One that had nothing to do with steel or concrete. It was the global financial meltdown of 2009. Budgets were being slashed across every level of U.S. government. Infrastructure projects across the country were being paused, scaled down, or canceled outright. With funding in limbo, deadlines under pressure, and political uncertainty swirling, many expected CSCEC to pull back. After all, why would a foreign contractor stick around in the middle of an American budget crisis? But instead of backing off, China doubled down. That last point is often forgotten. Despite being a Chinese firm, CSCC relied heavily on local partnerships, subcontractors, and vendors. While other companies were laying off workers or delaying payments during the recession, CSCC upheld its contracts, and in doing so, built unexpected goodwill within the New York construction community. That resilience earned them something no amount of money could buy: credibility. In the middle of the worst economic downturn in a generation, they still outperformed, outlasted, and outmanaged every other player on the field. And by the time the dust settled, they weren't just seen as a contractor anymore. They were a trusted operator in the heart of America's infrastructure. The message was clear. While others flinched, China delivered. When China completed the Alexander Hamilton Bridge rebuild ahead of schedule, and for a fraction of the original cost, it settled as a global signal. This was more than concrete, more than traffic control, more than cost-cutting. It was a moment where geopolitics and infrastructure collided. And the balance of power subtly shifted, because for all the budget savings and efficiency delivered, the U.S. had also done something it rarely admits publicly. It had ceded control of a critical national project to a geopolitical rival. And China knew exactly what that meant. By successfully completing the bridge, CSCC didn't just earn credibility in New York. It earned trust across the United States. After the Hamilton project, Chinese firms were quietly awarded roles in other infrastructure builds, from metro systems to highway expansions and rail networks. And this wasn't just happening in the U.S., it was happening globally. Today, countries across Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, and even Europe are turning to Chinese firms to build their megaprojects. Because those firms deliver fast, cheap, and with stunning levels of precision. It's no coincidence that many of those same countries are now participating in China's Belt and Road Initiative, a massive infrastructure and trade strategy that's reshaping global alliances. And that's where the real warning lies. While American firms are bogged down by bureaucracy, fragmented supply chains, and political infighting, China is weaponizing competence. They're using bridges, railroads, ports, and highways, not just to build infrastructure, but to build influence. The Alexander Hamilton Bridge was a modest project by Chinese standards, but it was a symbolic milestone. A Chinese firm succeeded where American companies could not, and did it on American soil, under American scrutiny, during an American financial crisis. For the U.S., that's more than uncomfortable. It's a wake-up call, because if you want to understand the future of global power, don't just watch for who builds the next missile or warship. Watch for who builds the next bridge.